Hello, everyone, and welcome to Slash Film Daily for May 24th, 2018. On today's episode, we'll discuss the latest film and TV news and try to answer a question in the mailbag. And I will run an exclusive interview with Ron Howard, director of Solo, A Star Wars Story. This is Slash Film editor-in-chief Peter Sciretta, and joining me on today's podcast is Slash Film senior writer Ben Pearson.
Hey, what's going on?
Just you and me today. It's a slow news day, so I thought... since you wrote all the stories that I wanted to talk about, it only makes sense to have you as the only guest on today's podcast.
Let's do it.
Okay. I think yesterday or the day before we were talking about Michael Bay's Six Underground. This is the movie that Netflix has bought from Michael Bay. And I think during that podcast, we kind of theorized that, I think it was Jacob that theorized that Netflix is going to be, the future company that buys all is the company that filmmakers go to make their original projects and not franchise adaptations, sequels. And at the time, I think he mentioned, mid-budget. But it looks like Netflix is trying to go big. What do we know, Ben?
Yes, so Six Underground, which is Michael Bay's new movie, it's written by Rhett Reese and Paul Wernick, the same guys who wrote the Deadpool movies, and it stars Ryan Reynolds, also the star of Deadpool, is going to be the most expensive Netflix original movie yet. Some new details have quietly emerged about this film, and the budget is supposed to be in the $150 million range. So that is a lot more than $90 million, which was previously the highest amount that Netflix had spent on a movie, and they spent $90 million on David Ayer's Bright last year. So from 90 to 150 is a pretty big jump. We also know that Martin Scorsese's highly anticipated film The Irishman is supposed to be coming out sometime maybe this year, maybe next year. That movie has a budget of $140 million, but even we're not sure what that film is going to end up at because he's still working on it right now. And I've actually heard that it's $140 million and climbing, so I don't know where that climb is going to end. But as of right now, $150 million for Six Underground is the most amount of money that Netflix will have spent on an original movie.
Now, I just love that there is a company out there willing to spend that much money on an original property of some kind. I know that many listeners out there are probably, just writing this off. Oh, it's Michael Bay. It's not going to be any good, blah, blah, blah. But it is an original Michael Bay movie. And I very much enjoy the Michael Bay original movies like Pain and Gain. Mm-hmm. For the most part. So I'm just wondering, how long do you think it's going to take before Netflix gets into the franchise business where they are, obviously Disney owns Star Wars and Amazon owns Lord of the Rings at this point, but, maybe one day, Netflix could produce the next Harry Potter movie. Do you think that's a possibility? Something big like that?
It's interesting. I don't know, because those other studios own a lot of those properties. I don't know how likely it is that something like a Harry Potter or something in that realm would ever go make the jump to Netflix. But it's interesting that you mentioned franchises, because Six Underground is actually being eyed as the start of a new franchise. So, and we also know that,
it is.
Yeah, naturally. And Bright, the Will Smith movie that we just mentioned that Netflix also spent a ton of money on last year, is also getting a sequel. So it's not like Netflix is not already in the franchise business. They're just trying to cultivate their own original properties. And, it's one of those things where they don't really have that much incentive to make good movies. They just need flashy, buzzworthy. Look at the Cloverfield paradox as an example, right? We talked about that when that movie came out earlier this year. It seems insane that movie came out this year. It seems so long ago, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But that's one of those things where it got everybody talking. The movie wasn't great, but it got people interested in talking about Netflix, and that's all they want, right? Is just more subscribers and to keep the subscribers that they currently have. So I hope that they'll take an example like Six Underground and try to turn it into an actual good movie. But my fear with Netflix spending this much money on movies is that they're just doing it for the name recognition of, oh, we have a Michael Bay, Ryan Reynolds movie, and they don't actually care that much about quality. I don't know. I mean, it's hard to say at this point because they're still relatively young when it comes to making big budget original movies. So we still have to, we'll wait and see. But what do you think about that?
I mean, I think you're right. I think, they are just trying to serve up a menu that they can put on, we have a Michael Bay movie. I also wonder, there's a lot, Netflix, I think, was the company that kind of started that TV revolution of saving TV shows that had been canceled elsewhere. Mm-hmm. I'm wondering if there is a future where Netflix could do that in the feature film realm. Like, there's a lot of movies that get announced by big studios, and for whatever reason, the studio decides not to make it, and the filmmakers are still interested in it. I'm wondering if there could be one day where Netflix, steps in and, kind of saves these feature film projects from development hell.
Yeah, that's interesting, and that seems like something that is a lot more likely to happen than I would not be surprised if we start hearing stories like that very, very soon. Like,
or even like franchises like not that this is a good example of a good movie, but the Triple X franchise with Vin Diesel, was originally made at, I forget which studio, but then, Paramount picked it up, and I think now Vin Diesel owns the rights, and he's going to be, developing his own Triple X movies. So, I mean, maybe there are franchises out there that could, be snapped up by Netflix.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. That's probably a good guess for one as well, because Netflix is really, in the past couple years, we've known that they've had full market saturation in America for a long time, but they've been making some moves to try to establish their international audience and try to expand into global territories. And the idea of the Triple X franchise is especially appealing to them, I'm sure, because the Triple X Return of Xander Cage brought in, people like Donnie Yen and Tony Jaa and these international martial arts superstars into that fold. So the idea that they would be reaching out to try to appeal to Brazilian audiences and Chinese audiences and all that stuff would make a lot of sense for Netflix. So I would not be surprised if that is an exact thing that comes to pass in the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, we'll have to see. We'll have to keep an eye on Netflix and what they're doing with their movie division. I feel like so far they've had a better track record in TV. But we've been talking a lot recently about MoviePass and also their competitor Sinemia. Sinemia has announced that they're going to be introducing a cardless ticket reservation system. What does that even mean, Ben?
Yeah, so Sinemia was recently, we wrote earlier this week about how they were having some trouble keeping up with high demand. So for those who don't know, we've talked a ton about MoviePass, so I'm sure everybody knows what that is. You pay a $9.99 a month subscription fee, and you get to go see as many movies as you want. That's the basic gist in a month. Sinemia has different pricing structures. They offer some plans for as low as $4.99 a month, and there are some trade-offs. You don't get to see one movie a day. I think it's only limited to maybe 3 movies a month or something like that.
They have different plans that give you different amount of movies a month.
Right, and the trade-offs are, while MoviePass won't let you see a movie more than once, Sinemia does let you do that. It also works with any theater in the country, and you can reserve your tickets online beforehand. You don't have to physically be at the location like you do with MoviePass. So, there's really a balance of, it's just whatever program works for you. But there's this battle for supremacy in the movie ticket subscription game, and these two are the chief rivals at the moment. So Sinemia recently was experiencing some trouble because people were flocking to the service and trying to become new members, and Sinemia is supposed to be sending them physical membership cards, and the demand was so great that there were these huge delays for people receiving their cards. And that sounds very familiar because that same exact thing happened to MoviePass last year when they really sort of took off with their new pricing plans. So instead of just shrugging their shoulders and sacrificing customer service altogether like MoviePass seemingly did last year, Sinemia actually is looking to do something about that and actually fix the problem. So today they announced something called Sinemia Cardless, which is a new feature that allows their customers to reserve tickets online even if their membership card hasn't arrived in the mail yet. It's basically just you can log into the app and get use a digital card essentially to
so
go
it
ahead and
provides you with a temporary card number or something.
I think that's right. Yes. So yeah, they're people, their CEO and the team that works for the company is basically saying we realize that there's this huge demand and we want our customers to be able to jump in and actually use our service right away. So we're introducing this plan where people can all subscribers right now, it's available right this second with a paid account, can select the movie and showtime through the app and use this digital one-time only payment information that's associated with their account to finish their checkout process.
It could end up that Sinemia will be the survivor, by next year. The MoviePass, the parent company of MoviePass, their stock has tumbled. It's been pretty drastic, and a lot of people are speculating how much longer they can last. I just wonder, if this company does go out of business, are they going to sell? They have so many subscribers at this point, MoviePass. I would think that they would sell it to someone. Do you know what I mean? I feel like it's not... And there's also all these subscribers who have signed up for year-long subscriptions. I don't know. I think it's going to be an interesting situation if, this does fail, because I think someone would want that subscriber base. Maybe Sinemia, maybe AMC, someone.
Yeah. There's too much data there to leave on the table. So I'm sure somebody will come along and buy it. I just don't know if that will result in the program as we know it existing and just that data existing and sort of changing hands from one company to another. But it might get messy. I don't know. I
don't think it's just data. I think subscribers is something that a lot of these companies are competing for. Companies like Uber are not even making a profit right now. It's all about their subscriber base and that being worth something in the future. So. So I don't know. We'll have to see. We'll keep an eye on this. Let's talk about George R.R. Martin. He is developing another movie because he just has no time to write The Winds of Winter, as you put in your headline. What is going on here?
Yeah, so he's working on an animated adaptation of a short story that he wrote called The Ice Dragon. And he wrote this in 1980, which is well before A Game of Thrones, which is the first book in the Song of Ice and Fire novel series on which the HBO series is based. And that was first published in 1996. So this, The Ice Dragon, is not set within the world of Westeros, which is the fictional world in Game of Thrones. It takes place in an entirely different world, but it does feature, obviously, an ice dragon. And there's, I'll read you this a little bit of the synopsis from the book from Amazon. Let's see. Oh, it's interesting because, I'll get to that. Here we go. In the world of A Song in Ice and Fire, the ice dragon was a creature of legend and fear, for no man had ever tamed one. But when it flew overhead, it left in its wake desolate cold and frozen land. Adara was not afraid, for Adara was a winter child born during the worst freeze that anyone, even the old ones, could remember. So it's very George R. R. Martin-y in that way. Yeah. It's definitely a precursor to the type of writing that he would do in A Song of Ice and Fire. But while it's interesting because this book description says that this is straight from the publisher too on Amazon, and it claims that this book is actually set within the world of Westeros and the Game of Thrones world. But George R. R. Martin himself actually said in a comment on his blog that the two properties are not set in the same universe. So it seems like these publishers are trying to just I don't know. The short story was originally published in 1980, but it was repackaged into a children's book in 2007 and then again in 2014. So it seems like maybe they're trying to capitalize on some of the success of Game of Thrones and just being like, hey, come check this out. This George R. R. Martin dragon property. You recognize this, right? So I don't know. There's some shifty stuff going on there.
So how is Martin involved with this?
He is actually involved in the making of this movie. He's just going to be a producer on this film, and this is for Warner Brothers Animation. So we don't know who's going to be writing or directing the movie yet, but we know that Martin is producing it. And, as you mentioned, he's supposed to be theoretically working on The Winds of Winter, which is the next book in the Song of Ice and Fire franchise. And fans have been waiting on that book for years and years. I think the last one came out in 2011. And meanwhile, he's busy working on a ton of different projects. Sci-Fi is adapting a version of Night Flyers, which is another book that he wrote, into a new TV show. And of course, Game of Thrones returns for its final season next year. So we don't know anything anymore about this Ice Dragon plot or when exactly we're going to see this movie, but it's just one more thing on Martin's plate that is not him sitting down and finishing up the book series that fans are really waiting for him to finish.
Of course. Yesterday on the podcast, we talked about the possibility of Universal creating a Star Trek themed land to compete with Disney's Star Wars Galaxy's Edge. Today we have some news on Star Wars Galaxy's Edge, some patents from Disney, basically outlining how they're going to go full Westworld with branching narratives. Ben, tell us about it.
Yeah, so this a fan site pointed us to a patent from the Walt Disney Company for what is called a procedural system for emergent narrative construction. And I'm not going to read the actual patent, but the basic translation of all of this legalese is that Disney is trying to create this system that will tell a story to guests in a virtual space in the park. And artificial intelligence might be employed to sort of shape and refine what that story is each time it's told. So we were talking a little bit about the lightsaber blades. Did we talk about this on the podcast?
No, we didn't.
Okay, so I was talking to Jacob about this off mic. But so earlier this week, one of these other patents that came up was this notion of Disney is developing this technology to theoretically have augmented reality lightsabers in the park, where guests would wear, and this is all still theoretical, nothing has been officially announced by Disney yet. I just want to throw this out there as a caveat. This is still just like patent technology. So this is all sort of like theoretical where things might end up. But the thought right now is that they could develop these helmets where people in the park could walk around and wear these helmets and basically have a handheld lightsaber in their hands and like ignite it, and you could see through the helmet, like this heads up display visor kind of thing. You could see the blade in your hand and it would react, to your movements and stuff, sort of similar to what Universal does with the wands at the Harry Potter at the Wizarding World of Harry Potter, where there are sections of the park that interact with the wands that you have there. If you buy one from the park, there's like this electronic connection between different fountains, for example, where you could sort of like stand in one spot and wave your wand and like the water would come on in the fountain, that kind of thing. You're supposed to be able to like, utter a spell and turn on the fountain. So the idea here is that you would have this lightsaber augmented reality helmet technology, and this whole thing about the branching narratives is that this patent allows Disney to tell these stories in little bits and chunks and break up elements of story. And you should just go to Slashfilm and read this, because it's much easier to read and see in a graphic than it is to physically explain.
It's interesting. That graphic is almost like that episode of Westworld where they were having that conversation, and it was having this branching. It was showing on the computer screen, where the conversation would go or could go next in different branches.
Yeah, it's almost like predictive text for your phone.
Yeah. It's interesting because they've kind of pitched the idea that like you could ride the Millennium Falcon ride, and depending on how you do, because I guess you're transporting cargo somewhere, if like you do very badly, then the person that you're transferring cargo for could send bounty hunters out after you, which could confront you in the park elsewhere. So like after you have ridden this ride, the decisions that you made on the ride could come to continue along with you throughout your adventure in that land, which is just incredible. And I almost don't believe that they're going to be able to do something of that magnitude on this level with that many guests in a theme park. It seems insane to me, but I'm super excited for it. Do you think this is actually going to work in practicality?
I think so. Yeah, I think Jacob Hall was talking to us a little bit about this, and he mentioned that that Disney uses these magic bands, which you might recall from seeing the Florida Project. There's these bands that you wear on your wrist that have all your credit card information, the park tickets, all this kind of stuff. So I feel like some of this could actually factor into this as well, where like the point in the narrative where each individual guest might be could be stored on this band, and then when you walk into a hotel, for example, that's connected to this Star Wars universe, or a different ride or something, it could trigger these augmented reality experiences based on where you are in the timeline, you know? So I think there's a lot of potential there for like really outside of the box storytelling that people are not going to be expecting. And it's a kind of an exciting time in you know where we are in terms of like theme park technology right now. It's all happening, Peter.
Yeah, those magic band that makes sense with the magic bands, but that's only in Florida. Disneyland in California, they don't have those magic bands. So I'm wondering how a story is gonna, you know, be attached to a guest, and how cast members and characters are going to know about that. Like I've heard rumors that they're going to do some kind of facial recognition system. And that just sounds insane. Like it just like this stuff sounds like it's like 10 years, 20 years, you know, ahead of its time. But
yeah, and one of those things when I was writing about the lightsaber technology was in the patent, there was some verbiage in there about how there would be recorded, like it would be able to record your experience and then essentially like package it for you and sell it back to you. Like you could maybe buy a DVD or something of like what you see through the heads up display that you're wearing on this helmet. And then, but one of the pieces of verbiage in the patent was talking about how it would also measure things like the physiology of the individual guests, like your heart rate. And I'm like, oh my God, this is starting to sound like the actual Westworld now, like a little questionable, but yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, we should move on to our mailbag segment. We have a listener named Owen from Los Angeles who has written in about that Wall Street Journal article we talked about, I think a couple weeks ago, that attributed that 70% of the finished film Solo: A Star Wars Story was directed by Ron Howard, and 30% was directed by Lord and Miller. Now, Owen thinks that this is a very interesting discussion because, sure, Howard shot 70% of the actual film, but he didn't cast the movie. He didn't do previs. He didn't hire the key crew, including the DP. He didn't set the look and style of the film. So, Lord and Miller left, but, is 70% of this film really Ron Howard's film? What do you think, Ben?
I think this is an excellent point, and it's something that I did not really consider when we were talking about this last week. I think that there is a ton of work that goes into setting up a movie in the pre-production stages that absolutely is controlled by the director. It's like that's a director's job, especially in that phase, just to answer a million questions a day. And I think that this is a really, really great point. The idea that Lord and Miller did the groundwork of hiring everybody to put this movie together, and Howard stepped in. I mean, I guess just to put a fine point on this, I think the most amazing thing about all of this behind the scenes stuff is that when you watch the movie, I was specifically looking for there to be a clear division in the movie of moments where I would be like, yep, that was Lord and Miller, or yep, that was Han Solo, or Ron Howard. And it felt pretty seamless to me. So in terms of,
I can't even pick out a scene that I'm like, that is definitely Ron Howard, or that's definitely Lord and Miller. I mean, right, and I can pick up scenes because I know Paul Bettany was not on the production when Lord and Miller were involved, so anything with him obviously was directed by Ron Howard. I know that logically, but interpreting it as an art, I can't pick apart.
Yeah, so I think that probably speaks more to Howard's ability to blend in and really, that's exactly why they hired him, because they knew he was going to be a reliable guy who could step into a world that had already been created and get things done. But I think this email raises a great point, and it's something that we shouldn't overlook, the idea that Lord and Miller actually did a ton of work on this. And yes, the 70% of the physical filming may belong to Ron Howard, but there is like an intangible amount of work that goes into, you know, doing the casting and all of that other stuff too. So yeah, this is a really good point.
Yeah, I think I've said in the podcast before, I've talked to, I have some filmmaker friends, and they seem to all agree that like 50% of their job is the casting and hiring of the key crew for their production, which in reality can be more time than the actual filming of the movie, because doing all that development process, the script, hiring the cast, and
like sometimes filming can only last 3 months or something like that, and this could be like a better part of a year putting all of the pieces in place.
Yeah, and I'm sure we could go back and see how long Lord and Miller were working on this film, and I'm sure they were on it for probably multiples more than Howard was, but I don't know. Owen in this email mentions that kind of maybe it's more like Howard is playing with the toys that Lord and Miller left him. And I think that's a good analogy, and that's something that I think, I talked to Ron Howard at the junket, and he almost agreed with that analogy in a way that, you know what? Let's just play my interview with Ron Howard. It doesn't have any spoilers for the film. I'm going to cut out the spoiler part, which is going to run on Monday on the site. So if you have not seen Solo: A Star Wars Story, you can still listen to this. It's mostly Howard talking about what we were just talking about. The unique position that he was put in coming aboard this ship so late in its voyage. And yes, so here is my interview with Ron Howard. Hey, how's it going, Ron?
Good, how are you? Nice
to see you. I really enjoyed the movie. This is a different challenge than your typical film for a number of reasons.
Right.
I mean, it's a Star Wars film, but because you're also coming so late in the process.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering, how was this different from, a typical Ron Howard movie?
I think I had to. It was an interesting journey. I realized I had to rely on my instincts, my raw instincts, more than I normally would, because I didn't have the time to prepare a movie and sort of develop a point of view about it. I had to have a point of view, but I needed to have it that instant, and without having lived with it for months or years. And that was interesting, because I had to trust those instincts, and I had, collaborators I could turn to as a kind of a safety net, but I clearly saw that no one was looking for me to be a figurehead. It's not the way these movies and Lucasfilm works. They wanted the leadership, and so that was interesting. The other thing was I went into it feeling that I was going to apply my experience and my professionalism to this, and I really liked the story and I believed in it, but it was almost an arm's length kind of a relationship that I was going to have with this, and I'd take advantage of the fact that they needed me at a time when I wasn't planning to direct anything anyway, and I would sort of tackle it as a professional / creative challenge. It did not take long before I was all in, and I was just as emotionally connected to what we were doing, and certainly by the time we went into post, and I was really seeing the movie as a whole, we went back. The one thing I'd ask for was to make sure that we had at least a couple of weeks to go back and be able to do some reshoots and pickups of the choices that I was making, because I knew there would be a lot of experimentation and exploration. We didn't need quite all the time that we'd set aside, but we needed, 7 or 8 days, and
oh, that's it. That's not
not that much, but it was significant, and and so that it was, everything about the process was again, a little more driven by kind of raw instinct and a sort of a leadership style that needed to quickly cut through the range of options, and make decisions. And I certainly looked to the collaborators, and used them, and I rallied them. I sort of, I said, I need one of you Kazans to stay here. Larry immediately turned to his younger son, pointed to him. Yeah. But Kathy pledged to be around as much as she could. Yeah. And the other producers were on deck, and so it was the whole. As we began to feel it working, it was pretty thrilling actually, and kind of affirming in a way.
I'm really curious about the part of, you're handed a lot of stuff like the cast and the crew, who are great people and great artists, designers, whatever. But like that train sequence, the train height, which is phenomenal. Yeah. How much leeway do you have to like add your own mark to that?
A lot. The action scenes were, they'd been begun, but they were far from completion, and there were a lot of question marks about those sequences. So there was a lot of urgent think tanking and brainstorming around those sequences.
Is it like you have the designs and the models and the sets you're going to work with,
yes,
but like what you do with them?
Yes, and sort of what happens next. Here's the script, here's some previses, here's some what else can we do? And my goal there was to link the key action scenes as much as possible to Han's experience. I really I loved Bradford Young's approach. I thought it looked great. I was happy to inherit that, and I loved the aesthetic. And the one thing that I wanted to do was sort of more intentionally and purposefully stage the scenes and shoot them so that you felt like you were right alongside Han Solo in this adventure as much as possible. I felt like that would generate a little more immediacy and suspense, along with the humor and the excitement and the fun of those sequences.
You mentioned Bradford. The movie looks unlike any Star Wars movie to date,
right,
but you still are able to capture the tone and the adventure and the humor. Is that a tough balance?
Well, it requires a lot of work and intention, and Bradford was really interested in that. Could you give the look that that sort of carried those vibes? Bradford talks about a scene having vibes.
Yeah.
And still create the kind of character connection, the cinematic urgency, and make the plot points clear enough so that the narrative was hurtling along, and he was completely understood that and was excited about that. It required in some instances more coverage, with that sort of purposeful coverage to try to bridge things than he might have expected. But he was excited and game.
You have a long legacy with Lucas. I don't have to tell you, but you were originally asked to do like one of the Star Wars prequels.
Asked, but I really want to underline that it wasn't like some sort of offer. It wasn't like I read the script and had an opinion. When he was beginning to get serious about doing the prequels, he reached out to a few people, and I was one of them, and just sort of dropped in conversation the question, would you want to do one of these?
Yeah.
And I had already worked for George on Willow.
Yeah.
And which was an amazing learning experience and life experience, and deepened our friendship. But at that point, we were really launching Imagine. I was, focused on that. Yeah. And it just didn't make any sense to me to disappear for a couple of years, into a sequel. And I felt, and one of the things that I liked about this movie opportunity was that I didn't view it as a sequel. I viewed it as an offshoot. Yeah. And it certainly, demanded, a sort of fealty to the galaxy as we understand it, and
an authenticity,
and an authenticity in that regard. But it, it was a standalone movie. And
you haven't done many sequels. You've done like 35 films, and only the Da Vinci.
Yeah,
series.
those are the only ones. Yeah. So it's an unusual set of circumstances that led me to this. But I'm grateful. I'm grateful for those twist of fate.
Would you come back for more if they?
I would never say never. I just don't know what's going on at Imagine. And by the way, there's no plan. Yeah. So that wasn't a step toward sequels. I love this cast, and I had so much fun in this sort of the filmmaking playground that is this universe. And if the answer is I'd be very, very open to it. I have no idea, whether that will even do it.
So there you have it, Ron Howard. It was a pleasure to speak with him. I'm so glad I got that opportunity. Ben, where can people find more of your work online?
You can find me writing every day at slashfilm.com. You can also track me down on Twitter at Ben Pears.
You can find me at slashfilm on Twitter. You can find all the stories we talked about today on slashfilm.com and linked in the show notes. You can find this podcast on all the popular podcast sites. Please feel free to send us your questions. They could appear in the mailbag like they did for Owen in Los Angeles. Just send them to peter@slashfilm.com. Please go rate and review this podcast on iTunes. Tell your friends, spread the word, and we'll see you tomorrow.